We may be a small but mighty group today. There are about 10 of us online right now. So it's 1:05. I do want to make sure we honor the time that you have devoted for this. So I think we are going to go ahead and get started. If we have some others join us, that would be awesome. If not, we may tweak a little bit in the way we handle some of our discussions. My name is Jan Sellers. I am one of the co-facilitators of the work group. I'm joined today by Dr. Jennifer Fraker, who's also going to be co-facilitating with me. Behind the scenes, we have Robert Herbert from CPE, who will help with some of the monitoring the chat. And then we have behind the fields, Joetta Fields, who's managing our technology. So thank you all so much for your time today, participating in the 9th grade on track work group meeting. Really want to offer my thanks for your willingness to engage and taking that time to collect the stakeholder feedback. I think you're going to really be excited by some of the data we're going to dig into around that today and some of the decisions that we're going to be making. As we begin today, we really want to be as interactive as we can. So we really want to make sure that, if you can, keep your videos on so that we can kind of have that visual engagement. Feel free to unmute at any time or post things in the chat as you have questions or comments. Do want you to know that all of the materials today that we're going to share with you will be accessed in our your work group members participant folder. Robin's going to drop a link to that in the chat. I would like to give you just a minute to orient yourself to that, locate it, and go ahead and open it up the folder to the July meeting. And so you'll have all the materials you'll need today in front of you. Okay, if we could go ahead and advance the slide. Mine's not advancing. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Okay. Hey, you know what? I think the amazing part is you all deserve a thank you for coming back. You came back to the next meeting. So that's a first great step and we appreciate it. As Jan said, small but mighty, but you know what? We have an action-packed agenda as always. So here's what's in store for us this afternoon. Of course, we're gonna learn some more about each other. We realized that, the last meeting was so heavy information with information that we want to take a minute and just learn more about one another. We're going to talk about the stakeholder feedback that you all were awesome in collecting. We're going to understand and analyze that feedback. Then we're going to pull out and talk about the themes that we kind of emerged from the feedback. Then we're going to look at determining and prioritizing our next steps and then wrap up for the day. Our hope, and I think it'll be even easier now that we're small but mighty, is to get you out of here just a little bit early as well. One big ask, and it seems like a silly one. We could really use your help in sharing our work, whether it's the things that we discussed today, things that you're interested in, things super important to our objectives, or maybe just in general really worthy of being shared to push on overall awareness. We please encourage you, if you're willing, to take to social media and tweet using the @CECKY or @KY Continuum. It just really, I think it will help to elevate our work. So we appreciate any effort that you might be willing to give there.
So I want to just kind of start us by thinking back on our purpose of our work group. And as you may remember in our May meeting, we are one of 3 of the work groups launched by the Commonwealth Education Continuum to identify actionable recommendations for better preparing students to transition K-12 to post-secondary. And our work group's purpose is to tackle those key issues around 9th grade on track. And as you know, 9th grade on track is a nationally validated indicator of student success, and it's really a strong predictor of high school graduation. So one of the things that we felt like Jennifer said, we had so much information packed into that first meeting, we did not really take the time to do more than introduce ourselves. And we really felt like that it would be helpful for us to take some time today to learn a little bit more about each other, especially as we're going to be working closely over the next few months. So we thought it was important to take this time, and we'd like you to take a minute and think about your own freshman year. Was there a person, was there a defining event that contributed to you feeling successful during your ninth grade year? Or on the flip side, was there something that was a barrier or that was a challenge for you that was defining during that time? So what we'd like you to do is take just a second, think about that. And as we'll go, we'll ask you all to unmute, and we'll share something about your experience as in high school. So if you would, tell us your name, your affiliated organization, a little bit about what you do, and then something about that first grade year as it relates to maybe a defining event or person. So is anyone brave enough to be our first volunteer to unmute and share?
I'll go. I am Beth Kelly. I work at KY Stats. I am really here to help with data. So if you have data questions, you ask me. So I'm sort of ad hoc. I went to a private K-8 school growing up. So it was very small, and then ended up going to, a bigger but still not big high school. And I think that makes a whole lot of difference. And also that advising, when you end up in ninth grade, it can be good or bad. I had one piece of good advice, but a lot of good advice, and I had one not great. And I just think it makes a huge difference right there. It's just walking in the door.
Thank you, Beth. And you are a valuable member of this committee, because as we're looking at data to drive our recommendations, we probably will have questions of some sources and maybe interpretation. So we're really happy to have you as part of our group. Dr. Young, we are just doing a little bit of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Just getting started with doing kind of an introductory activity that we did not have time for last time. And we're asking everyone to share something about just who they are, their experience, but to share something that might have been a defining event or person that helped you feel successful during your freshman year. And Jennifer, you put that in the chat. Thank you. Anybody else who also is ready to share?
I guess I'll share this. It's kind of a tough one for me, but I'm Nick Brooks, principal at Wolfe County Middle School. And I went to a small high school here, Wolfe County High School. I think we graduated with about 85 students, and we lost a classmate September of my freshman year. And, at the time I didn't realize how much that affected us, but now looking back and, seeing some of our students go through similar things, I definitely see what an impact that had on us.
Thank you, Nick.
Hi, I'm Janora Anderson. I'm with Simpson County Schools. I think for me, I was the youngest of three. So my mom had kind of been through it 2 times already. And so she was kind of the person that kind of drove my ninth grade year as far as like registering for classes, just helping guide me so I knew what I needed to do to be prepared for college. So I would say that she was probably the push behind me my ninth grade year.
Thank you, Janora. Having that person behind you that could kind of help facilitate and orient you to what you needed to do sounds like it was really helpful.
Well, she felt like she was a pro too, since she had done it with my brother and sister. So,
I love that. I think that's so interesting, Jennifer. So I would say I'll go ahead and share. Jennifer Fraker, I'm at CPE. I get the pleasure of being here to be Destiny today, although I've probably already failed you. Don't tell her. So I'm on the exact opposite side, being one of 3, I think, well, I was an oops baby in all transparency, right? 16 years between my sister and I, and my mom was done with me. Like, I don't think I had any help from my mom or dad when I got to high school. It was kind of more of a mentoring from one really weird, eccentric teacher who just, he was just that perfect nurturer who wanted everyone to succeed and really wrapped all kinds of supports on, hey, high school's different. Here's how I'm going to help you, right? So that's really what sticks out to me.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer.
This
I
is
can
Dee
take
Dee.
a
I'll go.
minute. Oh, go
Okay.
ahead. Go ahead, Dee Dee.
I would say my experience is very similar to Beth, going from a K-8 to a private high school. And really, as you transition into that, it's more about the other connections that are coming to the same high school that you're in. And, finding kind of your way with cliques. And I would think probably that, nothing as far as the teachers stand out as being, or the counselors that I remember. And that could be my age, but it's more about the connection with other students. And I think the direction folks have gone now with getting those student mentors and things like that really in school. I think for somebody young, they're not thinking like we think now. We've got a lot of experience to build on. They're not, but getting those student connections and those students engaged too, I think probably would really help. But I think again, at the private school level, they kind of just figured your parents have got it figured out. They know what you want to do. You're going to do it. There wasn't, I didn't feel that real nurturing type of, or that I remember.
But that peer group was much more from your peers.
Yeah.
Who else is ready?
Dee Dee, I'll go after, because mine is kind of similar to what you said. I remember just an awful sense of dread every time I'd walk up to my locker because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to get it open. And I thought everybody in the school would see it and notice it if I didn't. There was just this sense of everybody's going to notice every mistake that I make. I realize now that was not the case, but it was very real at the time. But I did have a lot of great teachers who just had this expectation that we were going to do well. And so that was super helpful, but it didn't take away from that sense of, I'm not sure if I belong here and I hope I don't mess up, it like that would have been the end of the world if I had not been able to get my locker open or something like that. So those things are big.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin. I think those things are very big. That sense of vulnerability that you have coming in, I think is sometimes can be overwhelming for some students. Who else has something that?
I'll go next. Hello, my name is Brett Foster. I'm a senior fellow at CPE. I grew up in I was an only child in a very small rural town where everybody knew me and my parents. So nobody really helped me because they always told on me. Robin, you were worried about everybody was kind of watch and find your every mistake. Well, they found my every mistake and they shared it with my parents, and that was always great. However, and they were right in doing so because I was energetic. That'll be the word I will use, and creative in my educational process. But there was one teacher who kind of stood out, and he was my economics teacher, and he just had faith in me. Where everybody else just kind of didn't trust me, and rightfully so in many cases. This individual, Mr. Shaw, he put his faith in me, he trusted me, and he gave me responsibility that no one had ever given me before.
I agree. Dr. Young, you put in the chat, it's amazing how often we start our stories with that one teacher. And I think that's such a critical piece of building that support and that sense of that our students need coming in when they make those transitions. Who else hadn't had an opportunity to share?
I'll go next. So I'm Autumn Bishop. I'm a district program manager for Gear Up Kentucky, which is housed in CPE. And so I oversee the grant in a school district and provide direct services for 8th, 9th, and 12th grade students to ensure that they're prepared for post-secondary success. So my education, I also went to a rural public school. We had a very small graduating class of 75. So we were super tight knit. Everyone knew everyone, much like Brett, and everyone knew your parents. In my 9th grade year, there was one particular teacher who I can think of. He really held me to high standards and challenged my abilities in the classroom. He knew I was capable even when I doubted myself. So for him, providing that additional support and encouraging me to find the confidence, despite if things are hard, really helped me and continued throughout high school also.
Thank you, Autumn. I really like that perspective of not only building those connections through that teacher, sometimes of relationships, but also that ability to promote that sense that you could achieve those high standards. Those are really valuable. Anyone else want to have an opportunity to share?
Well, I'll be happy to say I've known my friend Jennifer Fraker for 3 years now and didn't know how similar we were in that I was 16 years the baby of my brother and 21 years the baby of my sister. So my mom was very much over public school too, Jennifer, by the time I started going through. I'm aging myself a bit, but it was junior high. Ninth grade was at the 7th, 8th, 9th grade school when I was there. And like several of you have said, there was this one teacher, Janet James. I often refer to her as that favorite teacher who saw something in me. She was an English language arts teacher, and she encouraged us to be creative writers before creative writing was really cool. And she took an interest in me and really made me feel bright and capable. And then at the same time, while she was all business when it came to school, I from time to time would say, can I just eat lunch in here, and have a conversation with her about what was going on. So she took the responsibility to also be that relationship builder, and someone who looked after me as a whole kid, a whole messy ninth grader too, which was wonderful. And then I came back to Jessamine and spent most of my career there, and she was my colleague. So that was a real circle of life blessing for me.
That was those one teachers, those connections, those relationships. I mean, such over and over and over, so critical. Who have we not heard from? Anybody else?
My name is Angela Rao, and I just recently lost my position at Morehead State University due to budget cuts. So I'm in the process of looking for a position. I have a son who's going into ninth grade. This question is really hard because it's been a very long time since ninth grade for me. And I've been sitting here and I'm like, I really can't think of any one particular teacher or like even the guidance counselor that took any particular interest in the students overall in general. The only thing that really like sticks out to me about high school was, and I talk about this all the time, I went to a really small rural school, but a little bigger than some of the schools that people have mentioned. And it was just mostly the thing that stuck out to me that I think is different that helped us be successful was we also had like the vocational school that was attached to us. So I could take like honors English and college prep courses, but then I also took FFA and HOSA and drafting and welding. And so we got that overarching, well-rounded, got to try different multiple things. And that's what sticks out to me the most about my high school experience. That's different from what my children and the children I know don't have those experiences now.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that again just talks about that opportunity to find your niche and to have an opportunity to take those classes and be exposed to those things that are sometimes outside the realm of an academic content. I'll just share mine. I think we're sort of similar across the board here, that many of us are small, come from small high schools or small rural areas. I graduated from Woodford County High School. I think we had maybe 100 students in my graduating class at that time. As you can tell by my gray hair, it's been many years ago. But one of the things I think that really helped me the most, I think I felt pretty secure in the community and that I knew the people that I went to high school with. But that 1 year at my high school, they tried a different type of schedule. They called it a flexible schedule, and it added time into your scheduled block of time where you could take classes that were of interest to you, and you could go back to those classes for additional time. And so in addition to the time in the schedule for the core content that was required, I really found my niche in art. I really liked art. My art teacher became a mentor during my high school years. And that was where I spent most of my time when we had those flexible times built into our schedule. And so I think, again, that kind of goes back, Angela, a little bit to maybe what you were referencing as well, that opportunity for choice, finding the things that really you can connect to that may be outside an academic content. So that was kind of something that was unique, I think, during that 1 year, and then they dropped it from thereafter. But I felt like I got a good start in high school because of that. So did we hear from everyone? I think we did. Well, thank you so much. I feel like that kind of gives us a little perspective, of kind of what we have and what we bring to the work. And as we look back into the slides and kind of going on with kind of where we want to take this meeting today, I really think about focusing back into, let's see, I think where we are, slide 6 maybe. Yeah. Okay, great. And again, thank you all for opening up and sharing. And I think one of the reasons I felt like it was good for us to go one more slide. Thank you. As we think about the roles that we play within the work group, and as we're thinking about how we can leverage the expertise across this group, again, knowing what that individual perspective that we bring to the work, I think is also going to help inform the policies, the programs, the initiatives that we identify as being important in the work. We really want to be thinking about, as we do this work, what may be potential barriers, as well as those opportunities when we come up with our recommendations to be implemented. Really value your contributions to the development of our work group deliverables. And we really want all of you to feel that you serve as an advocate for the work group and the CEC, and building that awareness and the buy-in among our key stakeholders. This was one of the questions that slides from our May meeting. We were really thinking about those key questions from the CEC that might guide our work. And in our last meeting, we looked through these and kind of initially kind of gave our input of what we thought might be most pressing. And we identified the bottom right quadrant that identified key leverage points and strategies to engage and support our work. And so we know that 9th grade is that vulnerable transition point for a student, and the time when many students will fall off track. And so as we think about the data that we're looking at, and acting upon to form our recommendations, kind of want us to keep these key questions in mind. And we'll use our analysis of that student outcome data that we looked at our last meeting and our stakeholder feedback data that we'll look at today to kind of craft where we want to prioritize and move forward as we develop those recommendations for the CEC. So again, just kind of keep these at the forefront of our mind, and we'll kind of look at this slide a little bit later. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and we're going to go through the data around the stakeholder insights. And I'm really interested to have you take a look at this. I will let you know we're going to run through a lot of the data, and then we will have time to move into breakout rooms and kind of do a small group discussion and come back and do a whole group discussion around the data that we see. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jan. You might recall that our partner from Education Strategy Group, or ESG, Janae, who you met last time briefly, she sends her apologies. She couldn't be with us today. She's got some work conflicts going on, but hang in, I promise I'll share the stakeholder insights that they compiled for us. And I'll probably go ahead and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to do the big no, and I'm going to talk at you for just a little while. So hang in there, don't hang up on me. I promise we'll work through this. I think it's good stuff. I think you'll really find it engaging, and we'll certainly work a lot with it. And as soon as we finish, just as Jan had indicated. So I might also encourage you as we go through, you do have access to this presentation in your Google folder. So if you want to access that way, now, later, it's there. But you might just be thinking about some things that stand out to you and jot them down as we go through. So with that, Joette, will you go to the next slide? So, okay, let's get started. So let's take a look at the roles and affiliations. You all conducted these interviews, if you recall, in focus groups, 39 individuals. I think that's amazing. Parents and students, which they were the most represented, as you can see. That's absolutely amazing, quite an accomplishment. We also had counselors, teachers, principals, assistant principals, district administrators, an education professor, and a business owner, which I think makes for a really well-rounded group, all things considered. Again, I know Jan already thanked you, but this is really, it's truly amazing. So next slide. So geographic for context, we had a pretty good representation from across the state. As you can see, the majority of the participants you can see are from Central Kentucky, and the only region not represented was Southern Kentucky. If you're like me, you probably see that 5 unknown, and that's because one participant did an open-ended parent survey and the parents didn't report where they were from. So that's what that is. Okay, so diversity. About 2/3 of the individuals that were interviewed were white, about 1/4 were Black. We also saw a few more, obviously you can see that, female participants than male participants. Additionally, the stakeholders worked at or attended schools and districts that were served predominantly low-income students, rural districts, and racially diverse schools. ESG also has a note that says that they spoke to first-generation college students and male minority students, also great for a sample like this. Okay, so we alluded to this earlier, the big question, what was observed across all stakeholder groups and emerged as key themes? So you can see from all the data, the following themes emerged: data systems, academic expectations, social and mental health, family engagement, and post-secondary goals. So let's start with data systems. Data was probably the most mentioned item in stakeholder interviews. Many educators and administrators acknowledge the importance of having a data system and strategy to identify students in need of having additional support, and also to be able to make changes across the district to improve student success. Early warning systems were mentioned as a tool to identify students who were at risk or off track. Some participants mentioned that the Infinite Campus early warning tool, it was a good start. Other districts also had additional data systems that pull data from Infinite Campus. And then parents also mentioned using Infinite Campus to monitor their students' progress was helpful. Yes, right. Being a parent with a high school senior boy from last year. Oh my gosh, why did I get those notifications when I swear I just saw you do that assignment last night and you didn't turn it in? But yes, so I think those are all things really important to mention. Also to mention other districts and schools that are tracking at-risk or off-track students are primarily looking at course failures, behavior, attendance, grades, credit earned. Some mention not using grades because they're too subjective, especially if there's not a standards-based grading, which we discussed a little bit during our last meeting. Few principals interviewed, they did not want to use a GPA cutoff for 9th grade on track, and also noted that there was a lack of standardized testing at this level. Also flagged that the importance of being able to disaggregate data and drill down to the individual student. Flagged that data is not always made available to teachers who could use the data to make decisions about the curriculum. Participants also mentioned that in addition to the data, staff need to regularly review the data and have a strategy to provide interventions when a student is off track. Parents echoed this sentiment, saying that parents, teachers, students, and coaches need to work together to monitor students' progress and communicate with families. Further, that schools and districts need an aligned student support strategy. They noted that while individual teachers are doing good work to support their students, there's not always a school-wide system to support specifically 9th grade students. And you can see this, the quotes on the left. I love when ESG does this. A principal said, we need for our students and teachers to understand how to measure if a student is prepared. We want our students to be able to self-assess and be aware of how on track they are. It can't just be grades. And then a former 9th grade teacher said it was very time consuming to make instructional decisions based on student data because it was so inaccessible. Fortunately, I did not have any current data for students unless I collected it myself, and the high school where I worked did not have a policy or system for assessing literacy progress for students. Okay, let's talk about academic expectations. So some notes. So to better facilitate the transition from middle to high school and eventually high school to post-secondary, clear expectations of what to expect are needed. As one participant noted, transitions are hard and freshmen often get lost in the shuffle. The freshmen who fall behind will struggle to get out of the hole. The most cited transition challenge for students, interesting, was adjusting to academic expectations. Students had to adjust to harder classes, having to turn in work on time. Oh yes, that. And teachers who did not go over the work as much as they were used to. Students also mentioned that they wish they had known the importance of their freshman grades and the implications GPA had for their post-secondary prospects. Another note, additionally, students mentioned the challenge of finding their way in a new building, especially knowing what supports were available to them and adjusting to new schedules. Principals noted the importance of consistency, whether it was grading expectations from middle to high school. They acknowledged it didn't mean just making middle school more like high school, but that high schools could benefit from looking at what is working for kids at the middle school level and then adapting some as well. Parents also wanted to understand the changes from middle to high school and appreciated the opportunities to meet with teachers at in ninth grade, especially in person at the start of the school year, and to help build their students' schedules. Looking at the quotes, I love these quotes too, both of which are powerful. One high school student said, having older students engage with freshmen about high school and their experiences, sounds like what we talked about, and what they would have done differently would have been helpful. And a ninth grade counselor said this, another struggle is adjusting to the academic rigor and expectations of high school, learning and accepting that grades truly matter and following them and create opportunities for them long-term. So true, isn't it? Okay, the next slide, theme is social and mental health. It was another common theme brought up by educators and parents alike. Findings indicated that adolescents in general struggle with anxiety and depression and benefit from talking with adults without judgment about mental health. Many participants brought up that the pandemic exacerbated mental health issues and impacted social and academic maturity. However, just noting one student starting high school in a virtual setting, it actually helped to make the transition a little bit easier, as they called it a soft start to high school. Multiple parents then highlighted the importance of extracurricular activity involvement and strong friend groups as helping their students successfully navigate the transition to high school. Lastly, it was shared that the social skills gap is impacting students in the workforce as well, with stakeholder noting that students were just lacking overall the interpersonal skills needed for the workforce today. Quotes here, then you can see, include one from a ninth grade counselor who said, the struggle I see most with ninth grade students is social emotional growing pains, especially with females. That age for students is a time of finding your place amongst peer groups and having to learn that some friendships go through seasons of life and are not permanent. And from a high school principal, we have to find a way to help our Black students. The pandemic was really hard for them. There was already a gap and we're working on it, but now it's like we are back at square one. Okay, so moving on to family engagement. Parents felt responsible for monitoring their students' progress, but noted that they cannot do that without the support and communication from the school. Parents said that they rely on teachers, counselors, and sometimes coaches to keep them informed about their child. Many parents noted that they use Infinite Campus to track their students' progress. However, they also acknowledge that not all parents know how to use Infinite Campus. For transparency, when ESG shared these findings with the Continuum's data team, they brought up the fact that Infinite Campus can be a powerful tool, but district use varies. So that although districts have to use Infinite Campus for data collection, as we know, tracking attendance, grades, things like that, they can determine which features of IC to turn on for students and parents. In some districts use an alternate learning management system also, such as Google Classroom. So it can really vary. So the data team ultimately said that they felt better educating districts and families about the features of Infinite Campus. It would be a good idea. Let's see, additionally, many parents wanted more communication from the school. Most of the time, communication about progress only came in the form of a midterm progress report or report card. Teachers were the main point of contact for parents, but the consistency and quality of that communication varied teacher by teacher. Parents and students also noted that the communication from the school is often negative or centered around disciplinary actions and was rarely about receiving praise or celebrating a student's success. That one hurts a little. On the other hand, educators mentioned that some families were not engaged in their students' educational journey, and that was an opportunity. Quotes centered around this theme, as you can see, both parents, one said, "We had to ask questions, research, and serve as persistent advocates to get our student who had an IEP the help that they needed." Another parent related that particular teachers made efforts to communicate my daughter's status. "I would have appreciated more school level communication though." So both interesting. And then finally, the last theme is post-secondary goals. I told you I was going to try to get through this quickly so that we could dive in. Stakeholders mentioned the importance of connecting the work students will do in 9th grade with their long-term goals. Districts highlighted pathways and dual enrollment as tools to help build students' intrinsic motivation and help them see the connection between 9th grade and their post-secondary goals. Students asked for more career advising and job shadowing opportunities. Students also mentioned that the ILP, or individual learning plan, it's not a helpful tool. I think some of us in the CEC last year had heard that too, but students, they mentioned that they fill it out because they have to, but they don't necessarily take it seriously because staff never follow up on it. Let's see, educators also expressed a concern that some students were overly focused on grades because of the important role that GPA and transcripts play in college admissions, but may not actually be concerned as much about learning and retaining the materials. That was noted as a concern. And two more quotes from students. Love student quotes. The first said, "Having a counselor that listens to what a student wants as a career instead of automatically assuming you're incapable because of test scores would have given me the encouragement needed to pursue college classes." The second then, "I would have loved to job shadow my sophomore year when I was asked to share my career interest. Instead, I was placed in random classes. That wasn't helpful." That one also stings a little bit. Okay, last but certainly not least, findings showed a number of bright spots and innovative practices being used to support students through the transition to high school. A couple of the participants mentioned using or wanting to use a freshman academy model. Certainly seen those ebb and flow. The academy model within the high school provided an additional support for those 9th grade students, and staff were actively monitoring their progress. One district was excited to pilot a new SEL curriculum for 9th grade students. A core group of the 9th grade teachers and their students will be participating in the pilot this fall. Another example, 9th grade on track teams were used by some districts. Districts share the data with the teams who regularly review the data to identify students who are not on track and plan interviews. A freshman seminar class was also another strategy used by one school. The principal noted that the course, which was aimed at helping students adjust to high school life, it had been a huge success. And these, as you can see, are just examples of the great work being done throughout the state, which is super exciting to always hear about. So, all right, so Shu, I warned you, that was a lot, Jan, but all good stuff to unpack. And now I promised, Jan, if you will help get us started and we'll dig in around these findings.
Yeah, so we will make sure you have access. Again, you
In
do
your
have
folder, I
access to the
promise.
slide point
Yep.
in your folder, and we'll pull those out into your when we go into breakout rooms.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So really what we wanted to do now is to give you some time to go into breakout rooms. I know there's not a lot of us, there's 12, maybe 10 of us who are active participants. So we'd like to give you some time to process the data. And so to structure our breakout rooms, what we'd like to do is give you have you designate somebody who will record some key takeaways from the data that you're going to discuss. So if you would when you get to your rooms, if you will designate someone to record and someone to present back to the whole group. We're going to give you about 20 minutes. We have a data collection form that we'll post in the chat when we get into our breakout rooms for your recorder to use. And these are some of the questions we'd like you to discuss around that stakeholder feedback presentation that Jennifer just took us through. Reflect back on how conducting those interviews or focus group might expand or change your perception. Think about how these key priorities from these interview and focus groups compare to that student outcome data that we shared last week. And so that data, those slides are also in your member work group folder. Are there any themes that might be missing? What data or voices might we be missing? And what new questions around stakeholder feedback or does that stakeholder feedback bring up? And then how are we going to answer those remaining questions that we have? So what resources might be available that you're aware of us that would help us gather some additional data or stakeholder input? So again, before we kind of go into those breakout rooms and we begin unpacking that data that Jennifer just took us through, does anybody have any specific questions around what we're going to be doing in our breakout sessions?
And you will have access to those questions, I promise. They'll be on our note collection document that you'll get. So don't worry.
Yeah.
And I might even recommend, just because it's a lot, I know I just talked a lot at you and tried to get it done as quickly as possible. We might just spend a few minutes just kind of lingering in the data and thinking about it before we really, I know sometimes I just need a minute to process what I've heard, especially all of that. So when we get into our breakout rooms, maybe we'll just do that first, and then we'll identify the recorder and we'll start to kind of unpack those questions a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, Jennifer will be in one room, I'll be in another. So we will post that link to the participant document. We can
So
also
kind of a
Jennifer,
warning
post
to you all.
post
So,
those
yeah.
questions in the chat, and then she and I can share our screens in the room to bring that data back up. So as we just kind of reorient ourselves to it, so that we're not overwhelmed. Okay, so I think we've got the breakout room set. We'll ask Joetta to send us in there, and we will get started on digging into the data.
You're muted.
Yeah. Hey, Joette, how long will they be in the breakout room?
20 minutes.
Okay,
I
well, I'm
was
gonna-
going to send you to the other one because somehow or another, I guess some people dropped off. They only have 3 people in there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to hop off here for a few minutes.
Well, so those in my group, I was a huge failure. Jan, I've let you down too. I blame Brett, not Angela.
Did Brett talk too much?
I was excited.
He
I
did,
was
he just wouldn't
excited.
stop. We didn't get anything done. Can you believe that, Dee Dee? We didn't get
I
anything
can't
done.
imagine. That's not the Brett I know.
But I'm serious, we really didn't get anything done.
It was quick.
We had great, or did you guys, Dee Dee, you guys got stuff done?
We got stuff done.
Oh,
I was the note taker, and Jan had it
Oh.
going. She was pushing us.
well, if you were the
But-
note taker, Dee Dee, I have no doubt. So I
It made me
filled my
focus.
group.
I had to take notes, so I had to focus. So
Hey,
But I
Joette,
forgot to record.
Joette, next time put me in Dee Dee's group. I'll
I
take
know.
care of that.
But we had some great preliminary conversations, and I wanted us to go back and linger in the data just a little bit more. As I said, I know I really did word vomit at everyone, so we lingered probably more than I was allowed to let you linger, so it's my fault. Would you all be opposed if we had just like, if we could probably knock this out in just a couple of minutes? I know, is that like, would that pain anyone if we went back in our groups for just a few more minutes?
you've got such a small group. Why don't you do it together?
Yeah, why don't we just pull up one of the worksheets that,
Okay.
did you all start yours at all?
Maybe not.
Okay, that's fine.
We'll start
don't we
mine.
just-
And I'll continue to note take. I'm taking
Yeah.
one for the team here, guys.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Let me
fair
pull up
enough.
the one that
See
we
how bad
started.
typer I am, and I have to go back and change the way I write
Yeah.
things
Yeah,
15
because
times.
we have time planned in our day for whole group discussion. We're a small
did.
group.
So we
I
can
think-
just, we'll blow it out and we'll have a good time.
I think
Be
we
good.
can, so.
And actually, sorry, Angela, I'm putting you on the spot. Pressure. So I threw in an extra question because I just wanted us to start at that. Oh, okay, you're sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Before we start with that, we just went to the 20,000 level and talked just about overall our first impressions and what really stood out to us. So Angela, do you want to share where our conversation went in that time?
Yeah, the notes that we did manage to take, we said the GPA importance may not be as significant as they are just one measure. And we talked about how, like from my personal experience, if you look at the GPA in college, that's more of a reflection on what was happening in my life as opposed to my ability or my persistence. So maybe, like we place more importance on GPA than it really should have. Demographics on income levels could be more helpful because especially like with the white population is all lumped in, and it would be interesting to see the low, middle, high data versus just like whites overall. Grades as a concern, they're based on teacher input, and teachers seem to be inflating grades now due to the pandemic. Those were some of the conversations that we had, is how that the grades, which then therefore leads into the GPA, is kind of, subjective, and there's not a standardized system across the state, let alone within the different schools themselves. And so how that plays in and factors on GPA and other data points. Is there? Brett?
No, see, it was a robust conversation. I promise, Jan, it really was. We just, yeah.
I think these are good because a lot of our first impressions of the data kind of fell into some other of the categories, and we just had Dee Dee in there, putting it in as we talked. But I think we felt the same way. We had a little bit of a discussion around, I think when we go back to your discussion around GPA, it kind of ties back to that definition, defining ninth grade on track. And we felt the same thing, that GPA is often kind of maybe the first indicator that people think of, but it may not be the best, or there may be a need to expand and look at how we define. So that came out of our discussion as well. One of our first impressions from the data really kind of falls in under this, our first thing around how to expand or change our perception. And Dee Dee, I think you kind of brought that up, as well as, I'm trying to remember a couple of other people. All of us, I think, noticed this. Nick, you mentioned it as well, about where we needed more participation.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I do think it's miraculous for the time. It's just, you're right, to really get a bigger picture. I think you guys are totally on par.
We also touched on the 3.0 GPA and the Asian Americans, how they, even as Asian Americans, they still had, like were outbeating the, most other people. We just talked about how like maybe the family engagement, the culture, and, maybe like looking more in depth into that would be an interesting research project.
Yeah, we lingered a little bit just on family engagement and the role of family engagement in this data, especially that it plays such a huge role.
And I think that may be something that we are also missing. Do we have, information around how schools or districts are around their family engagement really piece, how they are engaging and what's communicated and what type of communication systems they may have in place.
The Pritchard Committee is working on that. So I don't know if you guys work with them, but they're working on family engagement and getting data and encouraging more schools to work more with family engagement and teacher prep programs to incorporate family engagement in the coursework.
Yeah, huge component, especially thinking about how you front load that for our incoming teacher candidates to make sure that they're equipped on how do you do that, right? What are the tools, resources? What are the important things that you communicate? When do you communicate? All the things, right? So I think that's huge.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm just thinking out loud here a little bit, I wonder if like in some of the data that we have here, if the parents of the students are non-English speaking. I know for a fact that my daughter's roommate at UK next year, both our parents neither speak English. And so and that communication piece going from the school to the parents, that's kind of I can't even imagine the frustration that a parent would feel not being able to help their child because they just don't know the language yet.
Yeah.
That, that's an area that's very, very hard to measure. I mean, we have limited data on the school report card that just says, either the parents were involved in a parent teacher conference, or they were SBDM, or they, and I will tell you, I've heard from some districts, they go and count their check-ins, manually to give a number there. And just because somebody checked in doesn't necessarily mean there was meaningful interaction or anything like that. So that's it. That is an area that's very hard to gauge.
That's a great point. It doesn't mean quality for sure, does it?
No.
Yeah, it's just a touch point. And I don't think all districts use that feature, do they?
Where they sign in?
Well, and I'm thinking about Infinite Campus. Like automatically I went to Infinite Campus where you can log like parent contact.
Yeah, no, they don't do that. Yeah. And it's nothing that at the state level we ask, them to do. So there would be if they even use it, it's probably all different ways.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, and not to jump back on, but the Pritchard Committee is working on that. I forget the pilot name. It's the family friendly schools. And there's like, it's like a pilot project right now. We've got several different schools that are doing it, and they can apply to do it. And then they get basically like an outline, and it does delve into that, making things more than just, like signing up to volunteer, something more in depth, that family engagement. And it has like different suggestions and different things they can do, and like checkpoints, and they have to like check off, and it's like a process. So they are working on a process to implement, and the goal would get statewide, but of course it's, getting the buy-in from the different schools. So I can send some information about that.
And we have some resources on the MTSS website on the family community school partnerships, where we link to the work coming out of the Pritchard Committee. So that's kind of a spot as well. But we do, they're doing a lot of really good work around that. So there may be some ways to make sure we're involving, because that was a big missing piece from the family stakeholders of not getting those communications, or, in the school stakeholders too, saying, we're not seeing families engage. So it's like, maybe, what's missing, where can we send them. So if we're thinking about resources and supports that we may want to elevate, these may be some things that we want to be thinking about in terms of our work moving forward.
Most definitely.
The National Center for Rural Education Networks, new acronym for me, NCERN or something like that, is working with Harvard, and they're trying to do something about communicating messaging around attendance with some of the rural schools. And I know something went out to districts. It's nothing KDE is affiliated with, but Kelly Foster was contacted and did send out information to districts that they could participate in that. And I've had some districts reach out with, apparently there is going to be some interest in that. We've got some powerful tools in campus. I mean,
Gotcha.
with premium, the premium services of campus with a text message, with email, make calls, all that kind of stuff. And we tried last year, Jennifer knows that we tried to use some of those tools for college going, but getting districts to do it is just, I mean, we made it, we did everything for them. All they had to do was basically send the messages out. And once it was set up once, they could follow up and do it again. And we had a handful of districts that would do it. So communicating can be pretty easy using the tools that they have available to them at no additional cost. But, getting it district folks to find the time to do it.
Do you think that's the issue, Dee Dee? Do you think it's time? Is that really what it comes down to?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's just so many conflicting priorities, and people are wearing so many hats. I mean, not, from the KDE, it's I can speculate, but really the question is more for somebody at the district level.
Yeah.
But the tools are there. They're easy to use, and some of this stuff and this lift up attendance thing that's being done, I'm like going, they can already do that in campus if they would just do it.
Right.
But if that helps them, that's great.
Excellent points to consider. And I think it comes down to low hanging fruit, right? That we've got these resources available. How do we get more buy-in so that we're taking advantage of them? Because it could make a difference.
Right.
And maybe
you have to think about how you're communicating too.
Yes.
It's like, paper is gone. People are like me, they get their junk mail, they throw it in, they only hardly glance at it.
Yep.
And email, people get so daggone much email that nobody can ever get through it all. Text messaging seems to be about the best right now. If it's short and to the point, maybe with a link. But really thinking about your audience, and you can send things out on Facebook, but students don't look at Facebook.
No.
So it's you've got to consider who you're trying to reach and what is the best mechanism to reach them, not just communicating for the sake of communicating.
You're right. You're exactly right. It's not only the mechanism, but the amount, and it varies district by district. We talked a little bit about this in the continuum last year that, several of the members on the continuum shared that, they may get 12 text messages from the school every day, and that's then becomes white noise. So it's how to distinguish what and how often, right?
Right.
Jan or Dee Dee, do you guys want to walk us through kind of the things that you've already listed, and then maybe we could all add to it? Would that be helpful?
Well, we've been kind of adding during the discussion too.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things
more about what you all said.
Huh?
I just love to hear more about what you all said.
Yeah.
Since you were the overachievers, whatever.
I wouldn't go that far. Maybe Jan.
Well, I could just share, when we talked about, how conducting those interviews expanded or changed our perceptions, we all felt like it didn't necessarily change our perceptions, but we kind of called our attention to things that we felt, again, kind of maybe were missing, but that's where we kind of identified those areas where we needed more participation, or we needed a better way to capture those voices. So that may be something that we would think about as sort of a next step of, are there some other ways to capture the voices from not only high school counselors, but middle school counselors, and kind of see kind of where those transitions and how they're preparing and supporting students. We love the fact that we had a business owner represented, but we also thought, that participation of community partners is so critical. And so might there be a different way that we could kind of get that input? Student voice could never have too much, and we do have it. Maybe we weren't representative enough, and so again, we were kind of thinking about where we needed more participation, and then maybe also we could think about some alternate ways of getting that as sort of next steps. We felt like we needed to be more intentional. It kind of gave us that understanding that there was not always an intentional approach to ninth grade on track, and that's where we got around our discussion around definition and the use of GPA is maybe not, is a lot of times what people think is being used, but is it really the only thing that's out there? So again, thinking beyond it. Some of the key priorities, we felt like same thing that you guys did. We compared it to the state data. We know that historically underrepresented groups, or have a lower rate of passing their credits their ninth grade year. And so kind of like Angela was saying, how can we look at that in some different ways? We felt like, that infinite campus use was an issue that might need to be addressed. Again, that might go through our communication channels. We felt like we didn't have information about how students are accessing mental health supports. And we know there's national data around that more students are accessing it through schools than our community. But do we have any data, statewide or district-wide that would be helpful? We've definitely thought about the communication, but we talked about family engagement data. What do we have around that? And then I just added those things on communication as we talked just now. We talked about the voices that were missing. And then we just barely got to maybe how could we answer those questions? And we were thinking, is there a way, to standardize what we mean by ninth grade on track and how we would promote it? And then what might be a way we could do more targeted surveys for larger groups of people whose voices were missing? Or could we access, I just happened to think of this as we were beaming back to the whole group, but could we access KDE advisory groups in any way? And that's something that, could be maybe a way to get a bigger voice. So that's just kind of where we are. I think our discussion, we just tried to make it fit. I don't think it always neatly fit these questions. But I think we were, as you, just kind of having that general discussion around what we saw in the data. So, I'm thinking that as we, kind of think about all of these questions and everything that we're asking, I'm always kind of thinking, where is that going to lead us? Our overall goal is to make those recommendations to the CEC. Based on ninth grade on track. And, the last time we said that one of the areas that, we talked about areas of focus, we could go back to those 4 key questions. Maybe we go back and look and see how we might want to prioritize those, where the things we talked about fit. Maybe it would be a good idea to do that and then kind of link it back to see where we might want to do a little digging between now and our next meeting in August.
I think so too, Jan. I think that's a good transition.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just get, Joetta would kind of take us back. Maybe if you would bring us back up to slide 9, maybe. Yeah. So when we talked about this before, and I think it's still a huge piece of the work we want to do, was all around, identifying those key leverage points and strategies, that we can promote. But I think in our discussion today, some of these other things kind of popped up to the forefront too. I think they all kind of obviously are important. So I thought, maybe, what do you all think now when we look at these? How might we prioritize these questions? Where might we want to focus our work for our next meeting?
I think we definitely need to come up with a clear definition of what ninth grade on track is. To me, I think it's hard to do much of the other stuff if you don't have a standardized way of addressing that.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. We talked a lot about promoting communications. I mean, I think that seemed to be a critical one, as well as knowing that we want to be able to recommend, we saw some promising practices in our data. We may want to dig a little deeper into some of the things that we know have strong evidence of being promoting ninth grade on track. So that may be something, kind of what might be a second priority for us after defining ninth grade on track.
Well, and I might push on us just a little bit because Nick, I think I hear you loud and clear, but I guess I'm curious, does everybody else agree? Do we have consensus that that's the first one? Dee Dee, what do you think? You're right there on my screen. Sorry.
That's all right. I think we gotta kind of rein it in a little bit. I don't know that we'll ever say this is exactly what ninth grade on track is for everybody.
Yeah.
I think we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I think we've got to start with, these are things that we're seeing that are important. And I think some of the studies that are done and things like that can look at, okay, how does attendance impact, ninth grade attendance impact college going? How does, GPA and grades impact, the number of failing, maybe you can't look at all grades, you look at the number of failing grades, those type of things. Don't just go with GPA. But I think there's got to be some deciding factors on what we see as important. And then the conversation to be is, how do we communicate that? The fact that we've got this 10 people talking about this isn't going to take us anywhere.
Yeah.
It's got to be bigger than that. And, I think about, how can we engage and use some of our, maybe our one-time money to help us promote that, maybe in ways that more creative ways than we've ever done. We're bureaucrats. I'm 30 years in, I'm a bureaucrat, so we know that we just kind of do things just a certain way. We don't have the money usually to do anything that's very creative. I was in a call this week or last week, I can't remember which, with a national call, and West Virginia was talking about how they were engaging and communicating with families about test scores, and they were using videos because people didn't understand the difference. And it's like, while we can't control everything at the state level, and we all, and I've already talked about the fact that if we pass it down the district, we can't tell whether it's being done or not. Right. There are some platforms we do have and some communication, and if we were creative, that's something that you could look at. And I'll include a YouTube chat that had that in there, just not because I think it's something we should do, but it maybe makes you look at things differently from a perspective of simplifying it, thinking about not everybody understands what we mean by even GPA, or what we mean by being your test scores, comparing you to the averages and stuff like that. Yeah. And with some incentive that you can get there. Just because you're not in ninth grade doesn't mean you can't get there by the time you're graduating. We don't want to earmark anybody. So that's more than you wanted. I'm sorry, Jennifer.
No, it's not at all. I've got so many thoughts right now, Dee Dee. So I'm going to wear you out after this call because I've got some great ideas. I love it.
I would just say I agree with Dee Dee. I think that we maybe are not going to craft a specific definition, but I think as we look at what defines ninth grade on track, if we could come up with some of those, what we know are valid indicators, and maybe make a list of what things that districts could use. I don't think there's ever going to be a state level definition, but if
it's soft, right? It's a soft definition.
But if we could these are the recommendations, these are things to consider as you're crafting what you mean by ninth grade on track. And we do have, I will say, if that's something that we want to work on, we do have resources in your members folder around some other states' work along what they mean by ninth grade on track. So, I think that that could be a doable action step for us to take back. Definitely the communication.
Very important.
Definitely.
And it sounds like, Dee Dee, so it sounds like number 2 then would be promote communications that engage and support students and families. That would be your number 2.
I think so. I mean, because I think until we get the word out, we're going to still be talking about this, and
what does it mean first? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, no one else is thinking about the importance of ninth grade. I doubt that, they're just getting through their days in ninth grade.
Yeah.
And their family supports and the importance of, the family support and partnering with some of these other groups that are doing that to really, message. And, maybe it's crafting a really not just informative, but engaging recorded session of somebody people look up to as having those conversations and encouraging folks to use that in freshman orientations or or something like that. And, and really talk about it in a way that people are like, well, I want to do that. I want to, I see that. I mean, because that's who told me that. It's not when Dee Dee Connor says so for sure. But, somebody, recognizable and somebody that has that, engagement, entertaining type of thing to really start helping share some of this messaging.
Yep.
And give a YouTube tool link that everybody can use. I heard one, and I wish I still had it, because I had heard one guy do something early years ago, and it was tied to Martin Luther King and all this stuff. And I'm like, going, gosh, if I had, if I really had that, I could, that was so motivational.
Yeah.
Just thinking about that. But if you can ever get to that point, I think it's, give somebody an easy button with something they can use to make a difference, because everybody's so daggone busy.
Yeah, I agree. Nick, I'm going to come back to you really quickly. So I know you're number one. What would be your number two?
I'm still thinking that from a school principal level, I want things that are actionable.
Yep.
So first I need my parameters, my definition, and then I need, okay, what are those key leverage points and strategies that I can do to make this happen? So to me, that's still
your number.
That practicality point of that is right up there at the top.
Yeah, it's hard because some of these are so intertwined
Yeah,
to me.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because promoting communications is probably going to be one of those
right
leverage points and strategies that I can use there.
That is a great
expanding
point.
post-secondary advising, is probably going to be one of those leverage points. So like you said, that they are very intertwined.
Muddy. We're just making this muddy, aren't we?
I got a question for Nick. I wanted to follow up about when he's talking about actionable and key leverage points. I'm just curious, what is your perception of how your staff might respond to a question about ninth grade on track? I mean, what would they think about that? And, is there any conversation already about college going and preparedness for post-secondary, or do you think there's an appetite among your teachers for that conversation?
Yeah, so in fairness, I'm at the middle school, and so we're done. We're done with them in eighth grade. Not really done with them, but the majority of our focus is making sure they get to that. But that transition piece is part of what we try to do as well. So that discussion is going to look different among my teachers as opposed, the teachers at our high school who are actually working with ninth graders and who are working with upperclassmen, looking back at how that ninth grade year affected those students. So, it's going to look different here than it would maybe at a higher level.
But I think, even at any level, it seems like somebody wants, something to kind of guide them. So whether it's the principals know their students, they probably know which ones are on track pretty well. I mean, some of the bigger schools would be much harder, but smaller schools, they probably have a really good feel for the ones that need some extra supports. But having something that would really align to what we're considering ninth grade on track to help make sure we don't have students falling through the cracks. I think, it's something that if we can come up with those indicators and the information is in Infinite Campus or in another system that we can kind of collaborate with, KDE has partnered with Infinite Campus to open the campus analytics tool to all districts. We're using some ESSER money to create some new data visualizations, things like that. So it could be something that, we could help promote and engage through that resource too.
So here's a wondering that I have, just kind of thinking about the things we've talked about. I mean, I think we've all kind of settled that we need some type of recommendation on some key indicators around what we mean by ninth grade on track. I think I kind of see the communications piece in that quadrant, maybe a little different. It fits into everything. And so maybe as we think about as we develop those key indicators around ninth grade on track, at the same time, we look at how that might be communicated. And then we also look at those, maybe identifying some of those high leverage practices that would promote success at ninth grade, what's out there, what's really, has the evidence behind it that we could kind of begin to recommend as usable strategies. But that would also need a communication piece. How is that going to be communicated? And then I think the piece in that quadrant around communication, I think sometimes too, it's just how can we engage and support families and students in their students' academic field. So, I mean, could we maybe start with quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 and build in the communication pathways at the same time for those? Would that work?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Beth, we haven't heard from you. I'm going to call you out. I'd love to know what you're thinking.
I'm waiting for you guys to tell me what you want, and I'll see if we got it in the data. Yeah, I'm here to tell you if we've got it.
I know, we want your brain though. Like what immediately comes to you when you think about this holistically? Like, what are you thinking?
I also have an almost ninth grader, so I'm listening to see what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I am.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll let you off the hook this time, Beth, this time.
But I think what Jan mentioned earlier, as far as being able to qualify some of the areas that we want to use as indicators,
Yep.
that is where Beth falls in.
Absolutely does.
Because, they can take and they can see that CPE data that they actually went on to school or they didn't go on to school, went on to school, so they can see how well they did in their freshman year.
Yep.
Well, compare that to attendance, compare that to grades or failing grade or a GPA or failing grades. Start comparing that and see what really does shine a light on something that versus us thinking it does. I think, defining some areas that we want them to look at further. They've already done a lot of work and they always do great work, but
Yes.
those are the things that I'm sure Beth is looking for.
So I think, Dee, what you're saying is, Beth, get ready.
Yeah, Beth, get ready.
It's coming.
Yeah, I think a lot of those questions will come up as we think about looking at these indicators. What do we already have access to? What might we need? How can we make that available and accessible to our stakeholders? Because that's where they said it's not always easy. And then how we communicate that out would be huge.
And I know Janora's been busy. I want to make sure that we honor her voice if she has the opportunity. So I'm not putting you, I wouldn't put you, I'll put everybody else on the spot, but I'll give you a break. But if you do have the chance, we'd love to hear what you're thinking around this.
Around what we have on the screen right here.
Yeah. And just kind of based on the conversations that we've been having.
And I do apologize, y'all.
No apologies.
I'm sorry.
No.
That's rude of me. But I think one of the big things when I was looking at the data that I collected from parents, I put it out there on my Facebook and said, hey, high school parents. But I got a lot of data. But the one thing is just boils down to communication. I think we have a lot of parents who have ninth graders and they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And they're really dependent on the school to communicate with them. What does my child need to, what skills do they need to have to be ninth grade ready? Or like, what do I need to be focusing on this freshman year to get them ready for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade year?
Yep.
And so I don't know how that communication needs to come. I know like here in my district, this year I worked with seniors some. And so, seniors, there's a lot of communication that rolls out. And the form of communication that was chosen was a Google Classroom. And I said to them, does everybody have access to Google Classroom?
Right.
And it was kind of like, well, we gave them the code. And I'm like, that's fine and dandy, but we have to make sure we ensure access.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the things maybe we could try to do is how can we give schools different ideas for providing access to different groups of people, because your refugee families are not going to get on Google Classroom.
No, they're not. You're right.
And we have this really magical tool called social media. I know it can be the devil, but I think we have to learn how to utilize it and leverage it so that we can give access to different people, because a lot of people access that. So, and that's just one idea, but I think that's the biggest thing I pulled out was the whole communication piece. They just don't feel like they have enough communication.
Most definitely. No, I think you're spot on. And I think it all ties back to Nick's original thoughts that, okay, let's hammer down what this soft definition is so that we can then really be strategic about what we communicate and how, right? So I love it. Jan, I'm talking way too much. I'll be quiet because I think this was supposed to be all you.
No, it doesn't fall into neat little categories.
No.
And so I think the main outcome that we really wanted to achieve is to think about where we want to dig a little deeper and bring back that discussion in those areas for the next time. So I'm kind of wondering if, if we could start with digging into some of the resources around indicators for ninth grade on track. And as I mentioned in your work group member folder, there's it's not under a specific month. There are just several documents from across different states who are doing this work. So that could be a starting point to dig into. And if there's some other resources that you are aware of or you want to bring in, maybe dig into those for next time and maybe come back and we'll spend some work time, maybe kind of hammering that out. Maybe also at that one, we could talk about how we would then begin to communicate and how that might be communicated with parents.
Yep.
And then I think when you're in those documents around ninth grade on track, there might be a lot of some information around some of the resources and strategies. So maybe we'll share at the next meeting some evidence-based practices that could be utilized at ninth grade to support on track. But maybe for homework, dig into indicators and think about communication methods. What do you all think? Because I'd like us to begin to start crafting, some of our recommendations. And I don't really know, like I said, I agree with Nick. I think we start with our indicators of what it is so that we can then think about how we might support it and how we might communicate it. Ideas, thoughts, kind of, would that be on track?
I see some head nods. Got a thumbs up, Jan. Thumbs up.
Okay. All right. Let's skip ahead just a little bit in our slides. We were really kind of clicking on our next steps. You can go ahead and I think maybe there's several clicks that might be an animated slide. This is kind of going back. I think we've discussed those challenges as they're related. I think we've talked a little bit already about what we want to maybe focus on. We look at the challenge of identifying what indicators that would define on track, challenge of communication and what might be some ways that we can recommend to support that communication. And then begin to look and think about some of those evidence-based practices. So I think, Jennifer, that's kind of maybe where we're going to go from here.
Yeah, most definitely. So let's move on then and think about next steps for sure. And starting with our next meeting. So if you don't have it on your calendar, August 23rd from 1 to 3, we want you, we need you. So please, again, mark it down if you haven't already. Did I say that we need you? We really want to have a robust group. So if you can, we're really, really appreciative. And we understand lots of things come up, but we really value your time. So August 23rd. And I'm pretty sure this is why Jan wanted me to talk about next steps, because you've got homework. That is part of ninth grade on track, right? Didn't we talk about assignments? So yep, you've got some homework, but they're super, super not bad things, I promise. So one thing is, if you could start thinking about, we love good stuff and good news. And I think today we talked about some negative things. So really just thinking about some of the examples of bright spots or best practices around first year success that we could bring back to highlight and start off during our August meeting. And then we anticipated it. So here it is. You guys nailed exactly what we were thinking. If you could start thinking about possible definitions of ninth grade on track. So what could be a soft definition? And even if it's a bulleted list, maybe as you're thinking about it during the day, brushing your teeth, whatever it is, just write down those categories even if you could think about those. And then we'll, like Jan said, come back next month and really hammer that out.
And I think, yeah, I would say again, the starting point for those possible definitions might be those resources in your folder.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'd like to go ahead and also have you be thinking around communication pathways. Dee Dee, you had several suggestions, so there may be some resources you want to bring back, or Janora, you may have some specific things that you thought about as far as maybe pathways to communicate. So I think maybe those could also be incorporated into what we do. Just be thinking about what you may want to share with the group.
Jan, you just added to their homework. So it sounds
I
like you were
did.
number 3. Sorry, y'all. Sorry. But just as a reminder, so really our impetus is that we want to start to begin to formulate those recommendations so that we're advancing our work. I promise we're really an action-oriented work group. So that's our ultimate purpose. And I know I said it before, and you can roll your eyes. I really meant it. We really do want to elevate this work. Kind of Dee Dee alluding to the fact that we are a small group and we've got to start kind of thinking on how to communicate the work. And even it's just our work and our conversation. So if you think about things, maybe, between meetings or even today after you're thinking about the data, you might even go back and look at it, whatever, have a thought, we would really, really appreciate it and encourage you to take to the social media. So if you get the opportunity, we would love that. And then last, just a reminder again, between meetings, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Jan and Destiny. If you haven't noticed or been able to tell just yet, they are 2 huge advocates for this work. So they truly are, and they welcome the opportunity to continue to engage with you, even between meetings. I promise they really, really are passionate about this work. So I know I tried to get you out even earlier, but we are 9 minutes early. You're welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity that we had today to be engaged with you. And I hope you found it to be a really productive use of your time. Again, thanks. Jan, I'll let you kind of close us out.
Now, I just really appreciate the rich discussions, the thought-provoking questions and things that you pulled out of the data, and just the expertise that you bring to this. And so really cannot thank you enough for contributing to the work around ninth grade on track. I do feel bad because I meant to mention at the beginning that Destiny, as our other co-lead, was not able to be here only because she had a presentation at a conference schedule that happened to be right exactly at this time. And so she was really disappointed to miss the group, but she will be with us and watching the recording and be with us next time. So again, thank you so much for your time, your expertise. Just the discussion that we had today was just great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks you all. Have a great day. See you soon.
Bye.